is just an example of us doing it in JavaScript. So we require in our mongoose and then create a schema. Note, you might see that this is a little bit similar to how we do our routing inside of Express, where we require in the package that we're using, and then instead of creating a router instance, we're creating a schema instance. And then we create a new schema, and this is the shape of what it does. So we have a title, and that's going to be a string. We have an author, that's also a string, so on and so forth. Comments is an array that has a body and data. Data is type data, and you can also give it these other values. So you can have a default value similar to SQL. You can do auto incrementing. You can do booleans, like basically anything that is a valid primitive in JavaScript. So your numbers, your strings, your arrays, objects, booleans, dates, all of those are valid to store inside of a MongoDB database. So what is important is when we're trying to access our data, I know previous classes, most likely they got you to install like MySQL onto your machine. We're not going to be doing that in this class. We're only going to be using a cloud-hosted version, so that way, one, you don't have to install it when this class is done. But secondly, when you go to push up your code, you want to make sure that you don't have to keep changing variables from your local machine to when you push up on Heroku. So if you go to mongodb.com, they have the ability to sign up for a free account where you can create one free collection, or actually one free database that has collections inside of it. And this is what we're going to be using in this class. So if you just go to mongodb.com, or if you just Google Mongo Atlas, just waiting on it to load. So you have that, try it for free. I'm just going to sign in because I already have an account. Okay, so I have my database here, and just like using Heroku, when your database goes, or after it's been a while of not being used, your database will go into an inactive state. And that's just so that, of course, they can save money because you're going to be on the free tier. We're not paying for it, so they can pause it if you're not using it. But yeah, if you register your account, this is, like I said, this is how we're going to be using our databases in this class. If you're wanting to install it on your machine, you're welcome to do so. I'm just not going to provide any support on your machine because, of course, there's a million different things that can go with it. But we'll see the syntax after the break of being able to interact with it. So we'll just make sure that this is getting set up so that way after the break we can kind of get into working with some stuff. If anyone's having an issue registering an account, just let me know. It doesn't really matter. I usually prefer to use AWS just because I don't really like Azure. Yes, yeah, default settings are perfectly fine. What do you mean? Oh yeah, yeah, that's yeah, that's just going to be your like default user for interacting with it. Yes. Let me double check. Yep. Yes. Unless if you want to pay. Yeah, that's what I thought. So just sign up for whatever one is free. You'll go through the process of registering your email address, password, and then you'll have to set up your admin account. Also, like once you register your account on Mongo Atlas, if you just want to, you're welcome to just go on an early break. That's just what we're going to be doing for the next couple of minutes because there's always somehow someone that ends up having an issue registering. We've had stuff where Mongo Atlas sometimes just doesn't send you an email, which is great to register your account. No. In case if you end up just going ahead, if that's what you want to do, there's two things just to be aware of. Is on Mongo Atlas, there's the database access. So this is where you register your account, like an admin account or a read-only account. When you add them, you have different types of stuff that you can do. So you obviously you put in your username and your password, but there's different user privileges. So Atlas Admin is a little bit different than the other ones. What this does is it creates a user that has access to manage your Mongo Atlas account. So you can do it if you want. You can think of it like a full access account, but you can also just do a read and write to any database. I don't recommend doing a read only, just because, of course, when we start writing to it, it won't work. The other thing that you can also do, which I do in this class, is you can create a temporary user. The reason that I do this is my code is going to be public on GitHub. So I try to put it as a temporary user that it's only available during this class. So that way, like I said, I'm doing a private or public repository. I don't want someone just going into my database, either deleting a bunch of stuff as an example, or creating like a bunch of stuff. As I said, Atlas Admin has full access, so they can, if you have your credit card attached to it, they can just start spinning up paid stuff. Not a good idea. The other thing, as I said, there's database access. There's also network access. So by default, you'll not have any access to your account, which basically means that nothing can access your database unless if you tell it to. So you can add an IP address, and there's two handy buttons. There's add current IP address, so it'll just take what your current IP is and whitelist that. But when you go home, it won't work. The other option that you can do is allow access from anywhere, which just uses 0.0.0.0, and it will make it so that way any sort of address is able to access your database. Also, typically not a good thing to do. In the case of us just learning in class today, probably not a big deal. But just like the user, you also have the ability to temporarily whitelist, and you can do 6 hours a day or a week. So when we start working with our database, if for some reason it will not connect and you know that it was connecting in the past, double check these settings, make sure that you don't or that you have your user registered, and that you also have your IP address that you're trying to connect from whitelisted. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to connect and create data, delete data, all that sort of stuff that we're going to be doing in class. So that's just what I wanted to quickly cover in case if you wanted to do it. So, all right. So it's 6:55. Like I said, you're welcome to go on break for now. If anyone's having an issue registering their account or just needs to talk to me, I'll be up here at the front. And if you want to be here at, we'll say 10 after 7, so 7:10, and then we'll start class then. Do we need, sorry? Oh, we can generate the connection string from, like, we can get it back. Yeah, no, you're welcome to close it. Okay. Alrighty. So before the break, we were registering our accounts on Mongo Atlas, and just because it's easier sometimes for people, I'm going to go through a PowerPoint just to go through some of the commands that we're going to be doing. Now, what I have this set up for the slides is there's a lot of like you can interact with Mongo through the command line, just like how we kind of interact with different parts of Node. But that's not how we're really going to be interacting with it. It's just going to be showing you that effectively you can just run, it looks like JavaScript syntax in order to insert data into our database, updating, reading, all that sort of stuff. But we're not really going to be doing that today. Hopefully, we can get Mongoose set up and at least getting, creating and reading data. That would be kind of ideal if we can get that done in the next under 2 hours. If the PowerPoint opens. Start using PowerPoint. I swear they keep asking me to do this. Okay. So I've covered some of this, so I might just like quickly skip over some slides. I'm just going to dim the lights. So, okay. So the NoSQL concept evolved as a response to the scaling problems that we have with traditional relational databases. In a relational database, data is stored in like a table, and the application logic reconstructs the data using an ORM. So relational model is extremely inflexible. Reason for this is if you were to ever add a new column, change a column name, maybe you make something that was previously not required as required, it is very hard on your application. Reason being is you'll either have to modify the data that's currently in your database and set like a default value if it was required, or if you change something in your database, your application will also have to be changed at the same time to reflect those changes, which is obviously not ideal. There we go. Okay. So the NoSQL alternative is NoSQL databases offer developers another data storage mechanism, which are called documents, which usually store data in key value pairs. So you can think JSON, key value. NoSQL documents are designed for high performance and scalability, blah, blah, blah. Documents can be nested inside other documents, eliminating the need to create table relationships, foreign keys, and joins. So what's nice about this is you can have a very complex structure to your data without having to recreate it with, left join here, right join here, full outer join, doing foreign keys, all of that stuff that, quite honestly, is usually pretty boring. You can just create it all in one document and just grab it as needed. NoSQL's horizontal scaling makes it perfectly suited to cloud hosting solutions, which can automatically scale based on user demand. This is kind of more like a complex thing, but basically NoSQL makes it a lot easier to have multiple databases running in parallel rather than like MySQL, which you will have to like migrate data between and make sure that everything's in sync. So here's a sample MongoDB document. Each document represents a record. So you can think of a document as like a row in your table. A document is stored in a collection, which a collection is like a table. Different documents in the same collection can have different schemas, unlike records in a relational database table. So as mentioned, you can just kind of throw in whatever you want. It kind of will just accept anything. A document field can contain another document, an array, or an array of other documents. And all documents must have a unique _ID field as a primary key. MongoDB automatically adds this field to every collection. So when we're creating it, we don't have to worry about doing an auto-incrementing primary key. But on the right-hand side, we can see here an example of what basically just looks like JSON. So at the very top, we have an ID, which is an object ID. So this is what is generated for us from MongoDB. Then we have an address, which is just an object. which has street, zip code, building, and coord. So coord is coordinates, and in this case, it's an array of two numbers. Then we have a borough, cuisine. Then we have grades. So grades is an array of objects. So you can see that we have two different dates. Then we have name is Vela. I don't know how I messed that up. And then a restaurant ID. So as you can see, we can kind of store stuff in many different ways. We have an array of numbers right here. We have an object. These are strings. Then this is an object ID. This is an array of objects, numbers, dates, all that sort of stuff. Now, when we create a date in JavaScript and insert it into MongoDB, it will automatically handle the date conversion for us. We don't have to worry about converting it into their format. It just does it for us. So MongoDB was created in 2007, and coming from the word homogeneous. MongoDB is the world's most popular NoSQL database. And what's actually crazy is I can't believe that it was, it's now that long ago. MongoDB, for the longest time, people were unsure if it would actually be good to use out in the wild in production, because they were saying, well, SQL databases have been used for countless years. Why would we use something else? But really what started a lot of NoSQL stuff is these high data companies like, Facebook, Google. Really, that's the two that I just thought of right this moment. But like large companies that are dealing with large amounts of data needed something that was a little bit easier to scale. Data is stored in what is called BSON, which is just binary JSON. It's a way of being able to optimize that JSON in order to search it well, store it a lot easier, because we're not just storing text files on our computer. It's in binary JSON. It's also supported by most cloud hosting platforms. It includes, as I mentioned, automatic unique object IDs, and supports ad hoc queries with a very lightweight syntax. So this is what I meant about it looking similar to JavaScript. So we have DB, which is going to be our database. Then posts is the name of the collection. So we're finding posts where its title matches Mongo. So this is just a regular expression. So this is, in my opinion, a lot easier than using a SQL query, where the equivalent of this would be like select star from posts where title like %, Mongo %. Whereas this, it's just like a function. Find the posts where the title is this.
And what does this syntax return? An object?
So this would return, because we're using find, it would return an array of all posts that match this. There's also some other syntax. There's like find one, but it will return an array. So how do I use MongoDB? Ignore this. We're not downloading it. But I always throw it in here just in case if someone wants to download it, run it on their machine. Just because, like, for myself, I'm from the country, believe it or not, as tech savvy as I am. We have internet out there. But sometimes the internet's unreliable. Power goes out, something like that. It's always good sometimes to have a backup, but I never really use it. So command line Mongo. So I mentioned that in this class we're not going to be using the command line, but it's good just showing how relatively easy it is to still interact with it just using the command line without any sort of fancy GUIs or writing any sort of code. So to start the server, this is again if we're running it locally, we use MongoD and then give it the path to our file. So it's kind of similar like SQLite, where we have it like a starting point on our machine, but of course all the stuff that's in it is stored in binary. So the default port, so as you guys know, most things run on a default port, is 27017. If you want to run it on a different port, again, there's configuration options for that, but that's the default. But just like when we run Node on our machine, it will now take over that terminal. So if you want to interact with it, you're going to have to open up a second terminal. And then once you close that terminal that's running the MongoD command, then your Mongo server is no longer running. So to start it, you would just run Mongo, and it will automatically connect localhost on the default port. So CRUD operations, first we need to connect to the database or create a new one. Mongo comes with a test database pre-installed, so we can just use that for this example. So you would just say use test, test being the name of the database that you are using. Then to create documents, we use a similar interface, like I said. It's JSON, so db.beers.insert. So in this case, we're using the test database, but beers is a collection. So again, this is like your table. What's really cool about this is we didn't have to create a collection, if you notice. So we just said db.beers.insert, name is steam whistle, type is Pilsner, and then on the next line, we inserted Sleeman Cream Ale, type of ale, and then we put on sale as true. We did not have to put on sale as false in the previous one because we can arbitrarily include or not include values, keys and values in our documents. So notice we neither had to create the beers collection, just said that, nor define any schema for it. In fact, our two documents have slightly different schemas. So we don't have to say this is going to be an integer, this is going to be a string. This is what we do in our application just to make our lives more sane, because having to remember what everything is definitely pretty hard. So to query the data, in this case, the first one that we have here is db.beersFind. And in this case, we're not giving it any sort of search parameters. What this means is it's just going to find everything. So it's like just using select star from beers, not giving it any sort of where statements, any joins. And then we use .pretty because this will just output the input. It will output what we're searching in a nice, pretty way into our terminal. Let's see. So updating a document, again, similar syntax. The first one is what we're wanting to update. So you can think of it as our where statement of what we're wanting to update. So update the beer where its name is Sleeman Cream Ale, and then we set $set on sale to false. By adding multi-true to the above line would update multiple records. So the first one, or the update statement, is only going to update the first instance that it finds with a name of Sleeman Cream Ale. We can give it a second option of multi-true, and it will then update all instances instead of just the first one. To remove a document, we use, again, a similar syntax, db.beers.remove, and then we give it our search, so where the name is Steam Whistle, and it will remove the beer that is named Steam Whistle. The remove function takes an optional parameter, which specifies how many documents should be deleted. Again, by default, it just removes the first instance that it finds, but you can get it to delete all of them if you wanted to do so. And again, this is not the way that we're going to be interacting with it, but it's good to know. So, introducing Mongoose. So this is how we're going to be actually interacting with our database. So Mongoose is an object document mapper, as opposed to a ORM, which is an object relational mapper. So in the words of the Mongoose team, Mongoose provides a straightforward schema-based solution to model your application data. It includes built-in typecasting, validation, query building, business logic hooks, and more out of the box. So when we're just interacting with the database, usually, like there's the four main things: CRUD, create, read, update, delete. I'm sure that you're sick of hearing of that acronym, but those are the four things that we typically do with data. But there's a lot more that we want to do than just creating data. Because there's no there's no validation offered by Mongo by default, the library Mongoose can put in that validation. So we can say this type has to be a number, and it has to be between 1 and 100. If we were to use Mongo by itself, we could just insert stuff as strings, as numbers, as booleans, any sort of stuff that we want, or parameters outside of those numbers. But using Mongoose, we can create a model, which is, in this case, it's going to be of type cat, and it has one value of name string. So it has a name attribute, and that type is a string. So when we create a new cat, we can give its name as whatever we want, and then we save it. So this is going into asynchronous programming, which we've covered in the past, where we have no idea how long it's going to take to modify our database. So we end up giving it a callback where it comes back with an error object. If there's an error, then that means that obviously there was an error. Otherwise, we know that it was successful. So to add article documents, if we had, again, we didn't have to create a articles collection, but we can insert, this is again just using the command line interface, so we could insert 3 example articles. So we have our first article, our second one, and then our third one. And they all have a created, which is a date, and then content, which is just a string. So if we were to connect our application, just like everything that we install off of npm, we would require in Mongoose, usually at the top of our file. We then use mongoose.connect to connect to our database. And this is the string that is in Mongo Atlas that they will provide for us that we just paste in. We then create an instance of our Mongoose connection called db. And we have 2 things. We have db on error, and this is just going to do a console log to let us know if there was any sort of error when it tries to connect. Then we also have a db.once, which means that on the first instance of the open event being fired, we will console log just saying that we connected to the database. This is, again, just to let us know that we connected or we didn't connect. It's usually good to do so. So now, in order to use Mongoose, we have to create a schema. So when we use Express Generator, it created a routes folder and it created a views folder. But a good way of structuring our data is we're going to create a new folder called models. And this is where all of our models that we create are going to live. So we would create a folder called models and create article.js. So you'll notice that the name is singular by convention. It's always good practice to create a singular instance of our model. The reason being is that a model represents a single version. So you wouldn't create books because that is defining everything. You would just say book, because when you go to create a new one, you would say new book rather than new books, which doesn't make sense. So our model needs to require Mongoose, and then we instantiate a new schema. We then define the schema in JSON format. And I have a question here of what does the document in this collection look like, which is just JSON. And we make the model visible to other parts of the application. And this is when we use the module.exports of our model. So writing the read method in the route. So in order to use our schema, we have to require it in like other parts in our application. So Mongoose models have built-in CRUD methods that we can leverage rather than having to write our own, which is, again, always the ideal thing as a developer. So we would build an articles page that uses the schemas defined in models/article.js to retrieve and display a list of articles. So if I were to actually open our project to do this, let's actually start doing this together. Oh, there we go. So I'm going to create a new project. So I'm going to go into my documents folder and Georgian College, Monday. So I'm going to create a new folder that's going to be called week 5, and I will cd into that directory. So again, if you're just using Windows or whatever, you can just create a new folder wherever you want. I just prefer to use the terminal just because, again, I find it faster for myself. So I'm going to use Express Generator. So I'm going to say Express. I'm going to use the dot to say I want this to be in the current folder. And then I'll use --view equals pug. So again, the express command is running Express Generator. We use the period saying that we want to use the current directory that we're in. We don't want to create a new folder. And then we say --view equals pug because we want to use the pug templating engine inside of our application. So I'm just going to hit enter, and it will do this command. So we can see all the files that it created. And then afterwards, we have to type in npm install to install any of our dependencies. So I can just type in npm install and then hit enter. And again, in case if you run this at home and you're not watching this video, it does tell you immediately after to install your dependencies, type in npm install, and then to run the app, you can just run this. In fact, you can just run npm start and it will also work. So I'm going to type npm install. And it's pretty fast at installing. We get some messages. And now if I open this in my code editor, and I open up my week 5 folder, you can see we have the bin folder, public, routes, and models. So I mentioned that we were going to create a models folder. So before I initialize my Git repository, I'm going to create the models folder. So I'm going to create a folder called models, just in the root of our project. And I mentioned that we were going to create articles. So under that models folder, I'm going to create articles.js. And we're not going to put anything in it. We're just going to set up our models folder with the, our models folder with the articles file, and then we'll just leave it for right now. And then we're going to initialize our Git repository and push it up. It's always a good, right at the beginning of our project, to initialize it before we get too far into it. So in order to do that, you can type in git init, or if you're using, like a GUI, you're welcome to use that. Again, I'm just a big terminal fan, so I just use git init in the terminal. And it has now initialized an empty Git repository. So this is the only other thing. I actually have to go back into my editor. You'll remember that it creates, or when we initialize our repository, it does not create a git ignore file. So you can see that all of my node modules that are all in here are also all going to be added to the project. So I'm going to create a .gitignore file. So it doesn't have anything at the front of it. Its extension is gitignore. And I'm going to ignore the node modules directory. So that's all I need at the top is .gitignore, and the only content is node_modules. And then if you're using VS Code with your, hopefully it comes with the Git plugin, you should see that everything will be green except for the node modules, which should be gray. If you're using something else, I can't help you. But if you open up your terminal and type in git status, you'll see what files are added and which ones are not. So in this case, I'm going to use git add star. So this will add in everything. Following paths are ignored. No, I don't want to add them, so I'm just going to use git. And then we use -m saying that we're going to be giving it a message. And the string is just going to be init. So okay, so we've created our Git repository and we've started it off. So I'm not going to push it up to GitHub yet. I'll do it after I start working with Mongoose. And then that way we can see, you don't always have to push up whenever you make a change. You can kind of keep your changes locally. So that way once you decide that you're in a good spot, that's when you push it up. The reason that we do this is if we're working with other people, when we have our changes done locally, we can still modify those changes. As soon as we push it up and someone else pulls it, then that's kind of set in stone, and then we have to modify on top of those files. Whereas if it's still locally, we can do undo in order to undo those changes on our computer. So, okay. So we have created the models folder. We've initialized our project. Now what we need to do is we have to install Mongoose into our project. You can tell that it's not installed by going into your package.json file and seeing what the dependencies of your project are. In this case, we do not have Mongoose in here. So you can just type in npm install -- save mongoose. And I'm also going to install nodemon at the same time, so that way when we make changes to our server, that it will automatically restart. You can actually install as many node modules at the same time as you want, as long as you put a space in between each module. So npm install -- save mongoose space nodemon. And this will take a little bit, especially if it's your first time installing Mongoose onto your machine, which this is for me because this is a new laptop. And then probably in a couple weeks I get to do this again because I'm getting another laptop. So it'll be lots of fun. So okay, so we've made our changes. And for myself, I always have this red X that's right here to let me know that there's changes to my Git repository. The only changes that have been made is to our package.json file and to our package lock file, which we haven't really gotten into. And I would say that a package lock file is more like, not necessarily an advanced concept, but for all the cases that we're doing in class today, it's not really as important, but it's just being able to manage what dependency you can lock it in at like a specific version and say you have to use this version. So I'm going to add both of those and create a new commit that says install mongoose and nodemon. And then I'm going to modify our package.json to also accept dev as a command and use nodemon on our bin www file. And again, as I mentioned, this is so that when we modify our server, that it will automatically restart for us. So, okay. It's a lot of stuff that we've had to do without even touching Mongoose. So, if we open up our models article, or I called this articles. I should not have done that because it's supposed to be singular. So I renamed it to article.js. Again, honestly, it doesn't really matter. You do you. We're all adults here. You can name whatever you want. Just remember it's usually good practice to do so. But in order to use Mongoose, I have to import it. So I'm going to create const mongoose equals require mongoose. And when I was going over the PowerPoint before, we have to actually connect our application to Mongoose. But as of right now, what we're wanting to do is just create our article, then we can connect to Mongoose after. So okay, so we have const mongoose, and then I'm going to create const schema equals mongoose.schema. I'm then going to create a new variable that's going to be called article. An article is going to be a new, actually I think it's, I always forget this one, I'm sorry. No, I believe it's just new schema. Now in Mongo, there's two different things. There's what is called a model, and then there's also what is called a schema. And they're a little bit different. So the difference between a schema and a model is a schema is how the shape of our document is going to look. So a schema defines what the keys and the values are going to be. So the keys are, of course, what the value is named, and then the value, in this case for the schema, is going to be what type it is, or what sort of parameters are put on that. Is it required? Does it have a min value? Does it have a max value? If it's an integer, maybe it's a min and max between two numbers. But if it's a string, maybe it's a min and max character. However, our model is where we create the ability to interact with our model. So you can create a schema without a model, but a model requires a schema to tell it what its shape should be. So in order to create an article, does someone want to kind of shout out what an article would typically have? So what is a part of an article? title. So what would a title be? Is it going to be a number? Probably not. Probably string. This is how we would define it. This is the most basic way of defining what a title would be. Now you can give it an object, and this allows us to get more granular with how we're defining it. So we could say type is string, but we would also put maybe required as true, because it would never make sense for an article to not have a title. The other thing that we might have is an article is typically written by someone. So in this case, it would be an author, or we could put authors. So I'm going to put authors because sometimes an article is written by multiple people. And this is just going to be an array. I can actually just use the array syntax. So opening, closing, square bracket, string. So it's going to be multiple authors, or it could just be one, but it's still going to be in an array. The other thing is we're going to need a body. So the body, I'm just going to put as type string. I'm not going to do any sort of validation on it. All we know is that there's going to be probably a large amount of text that can go into the body of our article. The other thing that we should put in is maybe a date. So the date is going to be when it was posted. So we're going to have a type of date, and we're going to have a default. So we can do default is date.now. So I'm actually going to rename our constant of article up here. I'm actually going to call it article schema, just so that I can reuse it later on. And you'll see why in a second. So okay, so I've created my schema. This is the most basic information that I want for an article. I now want to create a model based on that schema. So I'm going to create const article equals mongoose.model. And the first attribute is a string. So this is what we want our database to be called. Or not database, sorry, our collection. So in this case, it's going to be article with a capital A. And then we pass in our article schema as the second one. You can just inline it if that's easier, but I usually prefer to define my schema outside of it and then create the model as a separate line. So I'll just throw in some comments. So create the article schema, and then create the model based on the above schema. So now that we've created our article and our article schema, the last thing that we have to do is just export it so that way we can access it in our application. So we use module.exports equals article. And that's it. Unless if we wanted to make any modifications to our article, which we very well might end up doing, this is pretty much all we have to do to our article. This is a good starting point. So now I'm going to open up my terminal. I do a git status. I have changes to package, article, and all that. So I'm going to add our changes and say creation of article model. And I'm also going to push it up now. So if I do hub create help. Nope, don't do that. Hub create, and this is going to be COMP2068 fall 2019 Monday week 5. Actually, I'm only teaching one class, so week 5. So hub create git remote rm origin. Okay. So for those of you that don't like creating your repository on GitHub, they, again, as I always say, big fan of the command line. So I can just create a GitHub repository from the command line, and it will automatically add the remote origin to my repository right here. So now I can just use git push, although I have to copy that command. So now I can git push, and it will now push up my code to GitHub. If I type in hub browse, it automatically opens to my project, COMP2068, F2019, week 5, and you can see all my code is up here. So that's working. Also, no one's actually asked me about this yet, which I'm a little bit surprised, but some of you might have seen we found a potential security vulnerability in your dependencies. Who here is worried about that? Good, okay, cool. So, never mind. No, I'm gonna pretend like one of you put up your hand. You guys should be worried, like security, right? Like who here, like you see all the time about different companies having security breaches, all that sort of stuff. Like security is very important. So in this case, GitHub does this thing where it automatically scans. Basically, it's scanning your package lock file and looking at your dependencies and seeing if there's any known vulnerabilities. So it looked at package lock, found clean.css, and it says it's a moderate severity. If I open it up, basically says if you update to version 4.1.11 or later, it is fixed. I'm just going to say risk is tolerable to this project, which basically says I don't care. So if that matters to you, you're welcome to update it. But again, like this is a class, this is a learning environment. We don't really care about our security vulnerabilities all too much for our week 5 lesson or for our portfolio site. It's an accepted risk. If someone hacks my portfolio site and gets me a cool job, then like go crazy. I don't care. So, okay. So we've created our article. Now what we have to do, and we'll go on break immediately after doing this, we have to connect our application to Mongo Atlas. So in order to do so, if we open up our app.js file, we are going to also include Mongoose into the top of this file. So require in Mongoose. We then use or create a variable called db, which equals mongoose.connect. Actually, I think I'm doing that wrong. I always get confused because Sequelize and Mongoose are very similar. So if you're like myself and you have awful memory issues, you can just read the docs and they'll show you how to do it. So that's creating that. Mongoose connect example right here. Okay. So yeah, mongoose.connect. Here is something that's actually really important, and I wish that they would just use this by default. We have to put in this use new URL parser true. And the reason for this is if you don't, you get a warning. I think that they should just do it by default. I don't know why they don't, but I'm going to copy this in and, oh, actually, no, I do not need to do that. It's just mongoose.connect. So the first thing is a string, and then the second part is a object of use new URL parser true. And in order to get this string, this is what is provided to us in Mongo Atlas. So I'm going to go into Mongo Atlas. Actually, first I'm going to create a user and a network access. So I'm going to create a user that's going to be called test, and the password is test. Very secure. Please don't hack me. The network access, I'm going to allow everywhere, and I'm going to save it also as 6 hours and confirm. So this can take a little bit. You see status is pending, it's loading. It can take a little bit just for it to go. It's already active now, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But no, it can take a little bit sometimes for it to propagate, especially in a larger application. But what we need to do is go to clusters. So once you've added your user, you have your clusters. And the reason that it's called a cluster is there's actually multiple databases. They're running in parallel. So we can just click connect. So connect. And what we want to use is connect your application. We're not using the shell. So this is if we were to use our terminal. And we're not using MongoDB Compass. This is their GUI interface for dealing with the database. We want the middle option, connect your application. So it asks you what version of Node that you're using, or actually what your driver version is. So we're using Node.js, and we are, oh, hold on, never mind. We are using 3.0 or later. This is not asking you what version of Node you're running. This is asking you what version of the driver, basically what connects between Node and Mongo is using. So we're using the latest version. It's going to be higher than 3. So we can just copy the string that's right here. So we can copy or just click the copy command that's right here. And we paste it into this string. So the other thing that we have to do, and I get asked this, why isn't it working over and over again? When you paste it in, you get, so MongoDB srv : / almost like using HTTP. And then we have test. It might not actually include this. This is your username that you just defined. Afterwards is a colon and then your password. It does not copy your password because that would obviously be a security issue. But what you have to do is you have to replace password and you have to replace the less than and equal sign. So it should go username, colon, password, @. If for some reason this doesn't work, generate a new password. You sometimes have to do some stuff like, there's certain characters that it doesn't like. So if you end up using like a % symbol or something, I think it doesn't like that. I can't remember what you have to do to go around it, but anyway, username, colon, password, @. If it doesn't work, check your user settings, check your network settings. If that doesn't work, just change the password, see if that works. I always just use test.test in this class just because I don't care. But that's mostly it. So okay, so we've created test. We now have to get our connection. So var db equals mongoose.connection. We will then say db.on error. I'm going to say console.log there was an error connecting to MongoDB. We then also are going to use the once command, or the once event that I had mentioned before. So I can say db.once. That's the part that I can't actually remember. db.once open. Sorry. db.once open. We're then going to console log saying we have connected to MongoDB. And that should be it. Yep. Okay. So if this all works, this is always the not finale, but this is always like the big reveal is did I write code that actually works? We never really know until we go to run it. So I'm going to just run node, actually just npm start. And we're getting deprecation warning, current server discovery and monitoring engine is deprecated. What? They want you to use another one now? Use unified topology true. So I'm going to add that as another option. Restart. And now we're good. Okay. Man, they're just going to keep making new options for me to add. Eventually, it's just going to look crazy to teach this. So yeah, so you'll see like it says just use this option. You can just copy it from your terminal and paste it in. So this is good. We're connected to MongoDB. If you're not, this is a good breakpoint because it's 8:01. If you want to be here at 10 past, 8:10, we will then actually start creating and reading in Mongo. We're not going to worry too much about updating and deleting. That'll be next week. Yes. If for some reason Mongo is not working on your computer, just throw your hand up and I'll come try to take a look at it and see if we can get this working. I can even take a look at it. Yep. Yep.
Also, week 5's not visible.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make it visible. I'll do it after the. Yeah. So. Is anyone having issues connecting to Mongo? Yep. You can. Like, if you want to use MongoDB for like creating your projects and stuff like that, but it's not a requirement. It's. I actually should probably throw it in as a bonus if you want to do it. But yeah, I mean, it will be a requirement for assignment 2. So like the data, all the data being fetched to the website using this MongoDB. I will just be 1 second. I just have to make a phone call. Sorry about that. Okay. So it is the last 40 minutes. Oh, it went to sleep. What is it doing? Hi.
Actually, the problem in uploading the code onto GitHub.
Yep.
I need to help with that. First of all, this is like I can start.
Yep. So that's you're running it locally.
So now,
Yeah. So in order to exit out of it, you have to use Control C. Type in yes.
there is error.
That's just because you just killed the process. Like that's fine.
Okay, that's okay. I need like upload in like first I need to git int.
Why is this? It's
When I like do this, then reinstallize existing.
yeah. So you already have an existing Git repository.
So now what I can do?
So if you type in git status, so you can see all that. You have to create your .gitignore file
Okay.
to ignore the
So
node
now
modules
I can
folder.
create that one. Like I try to create here. So
So you'll create a not in the views folder, just in general, like if you just click down here.
okay.
So right click, new file, .gitignore, and enter, and now type in node modules. So we'll have to go over the rest after class. I just have to get, why is this still starting out?
Like this.
Yes.
I just and after that I need to.
So git status, so you'll now see that the node modules folder goes away.
Okay.
You can git add everything, git,
There is like the arbitrary. Okay. Fine.
yep, that's fine. It's doing, can you do the double quote?
Yes.
Okay, and hit, and do it again. Hit enter. So you'll have to set up your git.
So
We'll have to do that after class.
okay.
Oh, I see what happened. My laptop got unplugged. Okay. Guys, you just came in. Please stop talking. Okay. So just before the break, we just set up our repository to connecting to MongoDB. So if you correctly typed it in, you should say we have now connected to. Oh, okay. Well, that just like kicked off everything here. That's exciting. It like literally reset this back to using desktop and somehow turned the lights off. That's weird.
Probably a safety thing.
I was like, now the lights aren't working. Okay. So hopefully the internet doesn't go out, and hopefully this is still recording. Looks like it is. Okay. So now that we've connected Mongo, we can now actually start interacting with it. So today we are not actually going to create an interface to interact with it just because we're a little bit more limited on time. But what we're going to do is make it so that when we hit specific routes, we can create stuff. Or actually, yeah, we're going to do that. Sorry. So inside of our routes, we have index.js. So again, this is our index route of our application. If we went to localhost 3000 and just went /, it loads Express. But what we're wanting to do is replace this. And next. And I'm going to do res.json of foo bar. So if this works correctly, when I refresh, it will actually, hold on, I don't think it's going to because I'm not using nodemon, npm run dev. So now when I go to the index route, it is going to send back a JSON response of foo and bar. So on my computer, I'm actually using a JSON formatter so that way when it sends back JSON, it displays it in a nice friendly format, and I can open it and close it and see what's there. Or I can just use the raw output. But foo bar, okay. So that is working as expected. Now, what I want to do is on the index page, I am going to grab all of the articles. So in order to do that, I have to require in our model. So I'm going to say var article equals require, and I'm going to go back a directory, because right now we're in the routes folder, so I want to go back to the root directory. I'm going to use a slash, go to models, and then article. So this is going to import our article model that we created before. And if I save that, still no errors. So we saw the syntax before where we use db.thecollection.find, but when we're using a model, we can actually just skip that db part. So I can actually just say article.find, and it's just a function, and then I use .then because this is returning a promise of articles. So I can say function articles, or I could use the arrow syntax. Either one doesn't matter. But I have res.json foo.bar, or foo.bar. I'm not doing anything with the articles right now, but I want to find the articles, and then I want to return this. So after it's done the network connect, and I know that we haven't had an error, I want to display it. So if I refresh, still works. You can see that it's a little bit slower because now it has to connect to MongoDB. But after, it's hardly noticeable. It's pretty quick to do the connect. But now instead, I can return back the articles. So I can say res.json articles. If I refresh, oh, actually, I have articles in here that's from last semester, so I'm kind of cheating. But what it's doing is it's now returning an array of articles. So the first one here is an article, and it has authors of Chris Naismith. It has an ID, which is automatically generated, a title, date posted, content. In here I put hero, which is for like a hero image, and then date is null. So then there's another one. So I have quite a bit. I have 5 different articles. I'm actually just going to delete all of them. So if I go into my cluster, go into collections, it's going to retrieve a list of databases and collections.
But for us, we'll get nothing.
Correct, you will get nothing. That's what should be happening. I just kind of forgot to wipe this. So I'm just going to delete these. And the last one. So now if I go back, so this is a good example of showing that I'm actually grabbing from the database. I just deleted everything. I refresh, and now I get nothing. So I don't have any articles in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new route where I'm going to insert into the database. So I'm going to create a create route for creating in article. So I'm going to use router.get, and I'm going to create /create. Typically, when you're creating an API, you would use like a post or a put request. But because I'm just using the browser and using a GET request, I'm just going to use a GET request. So I need our request and our response object and our next object right here. So down below, I was using promises. So I have a promise of article.find that then returns back the articles. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an async function. This is another way of working with asynchronous code. And what this does is it allows me to use the await keyword. And this is kind of, it's a wrapper on top of promises that makes it a little bit easier just to read how the code works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a const new article equals new article. And in here I have to pass the key and values of what I need. So if I open up our model side by side, so let me open this to the side. This is what is required for my article. The only thing that's actually required is the title. So I'm going to put a title as this is required, and I'm going to put authors as myself, just for now. But I'm going to ignore everything else. I am then going to use the await syntax. So I can say await new article dot save. And then I'm going to return res.json of created is true. So I'm not doing any error checking because technically new article.save could fail, but I'm not going to worry about checking any of that right now. I just want to make sure that this is working. So if I refresh, there's still nothing. If I go to /create, I now get created true. If I go back, I now have one instance. So you can see that we have our author of myself. We have this ID that was automatically generated. We then have the title of what's required. And even though date is not required, we have a default attribute to it, and it will take the local time and put it up there. So it's actually using, you can see here that this is not what time it is. It's not actually October 1st. But because of the time zone that it uses, it probably is October 1st in that time zone. It's probably using GMT, which right now would be October 1st. And then we have this _V. This is for a version, so if you wanted to migrate your data from version 0 to version 1, you can do that. But we're not going to worry about it right now. So okay, so we have one article. If I went to /create, it would create another one, and we can display it right here. So let's say I want to actually put in a body. So I'm going to put in body, and I'm going to grab some, you guys have probably seen this before, is lorem ipsum text. This is just a bunch of like gibberish Latin that people, I don't know, honestly, I don't even know off the top of my head of why Latin started being used for placeholder text, but it just was. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in here. Actually, I'm going to use the backtick just because it supports multiple lines. So paste that in. That's good. And I'm going to also put a comma right here. And let's see. That's it. That's all I actually need. It's just the body. So I'm going to put, here's something that's actually, usually it does this. I can't remember if it sometimes, okay, sorry. I'm trying to like collect my thoughts as I'm explaining this. Mongoose handles updating and creating a little bit differently, which is of course a little bit frustrating. But because authors is an array, if I try to give it just a string of, let's say, test123, it usually tries to convert it into the type of what you're expecting. So instead of it being just a string, it's going to automatically put that string into an array. Or what could also be possible, because a string is technically an array of characters, it just might make each one of those individual. So we'll see what happens. The other thing that I'm going to do is instead of returning res.json, I'm going to use res.redirect, which I don't believe we've used in this class before. But I don't need to see that that user was created. So I'm just going to redirect them to the index page, which will then display our articles on that page. So if I go to /create, we get redirected back here. And now when I scroll down, the third article is the newly one that we created, and authors right here is test123. It automatically put that string into an array. So let's see. So if we wanted to change this, let's, I guess we have a little bit of time just to, because we're not doing an interface, let's modify something that's here. So all three articles have the same name. This is required. So this is a good example of showing when we modify an article that it will only modify the first one. So I'm going to use get/edit. I'm going to use async again, request, response, next. So I'm going to say const. Actually, I guess I don't even have to do that. I'm going to use await article dot find by, no, not find by, find one and update. So this will only find one and then update the matching article. So in this case, I want to use the title. This is required. So where title is this is required, I then give it a second object, and this is now going to be everything that I want to update to it. So I'm also just going to update its title to saying this article title has been updated, and save that. I will then also do res.redirect back to the index page. So this hopefully should work. No errors there. So if I refresh, our first article is this is required. If I go to /edit, we now get sent back to the index page, and we can see that this title has been updated. If I were to rerun it, you see that the other two, even though they have the same name, haven't been modified. So if I go to /edit, it will then find the next one, and it's now also modified that one. And then the last one I can do again, /edit, and all three titles have been modified. So now that all the titles have been modified, what ends up happening if I don't put it in? So nothing happened. Reason being is because it didn't find anything, so it didn't need to really modify anything. There's no errors. So this is nice for being able to potentially delete or modify something. Even if it doesn't exist, it doesn't fail. The only time that it would fail is if it tried to modify something and then there was an actual error that happened, typically with like a connection or something like that. So that's how you go about modifying. What is more common, though, is when you modify a resource, you typically want to return it. So this is the only thing that's a little bit weird about Mongoose, is under models, we want to look at updating. I believe it's just a flag called returning true. So if I create a constant called found article, that is going to be our article where we find one and update. We give it a third option. These are options that we want to put on the query specifically. So I'm going to put returning true. I believe it's returning. And then use res.json found article. The reason why it's important to use returning true, and if it doesn't work, whatever that key is it will actually return the old instance of it. So what it does is it will modify it, but it returns back what its previous state was, which is a little bit annoying. So we have to give it a flag to say, no, I want the updated version of what it was. So in this case, we are going to change the title and say this title has definitely been updated, and save that. So now when I refresh on /edit, okay, so that one didn't work. You can see right here that the title is this title has been updated, but it's not our one that we used in caps. So return modified mongoose object. Oh, right here, how to return the updated document. Oh, okay, so it's new is true. So new is true. Now when I refresh, you'll see that this is now the updated title. So this is actually the second article that we created. This is not the first one. If I were to refresh this one more time, we would get back that big body of text that we originally had with the lorem ipsum text, which when I refresh, you'll see is right here. So this is kind of one thing just to be aware of when you're modifying stuff is you need to use new true to be able to see what the new result is of what you've modified. Other than that, if you don't need to display it, because typically what we'll do is we'll modify it on one route and then we'll refresh where we grab the new data anyway. This is more for when you're working on like an API endpoint or something similar. The last one that I'm going to do, so edit endpoint, is I'm going to use a deleting endpoint. So delete endpoint. And this is now going to use an ID just because it's easier to do. So router.get /delete, and I'm going to do /ID. And this again, async, request, response, next. And I'm going to get the ID from request.params.id. And again, this right here is the same name of up here, so I could call this article ID, and I could use request.params.article ID. So get the ID from the URL. I am then going to use await article.find. This is something that's handy, is it has a lot of functions built into it. So we have a find by ID and delete. So I'm going to say find by ID and delete and give it that ID. And then I'm going to do res.redirect back to the index page so we can see that it's been deleted. So how do we get this ID? So this is on our index page. This is just the ID that's right here, the underscore ID. So if I copy it and I go to /delete /ID and paste it in, you'll see that it no longer exists. If I paste it in, it's not here. If I delete this one with a lot of text in it, paste it in, it's now gone. And then I can delete the last one right there. And now we don't have anything else. So this is how you go about working with the Mongoose API. What we're going to be doing next week when we have a lot more time is, for one, we're going to recreate our model just so we can get comfortable doing so. But we're actually going to build like a form so that way we can create an article based off of a form, giving it a title, giving it body, and then when we click submit, it will actually create a page where we can see all of our articles. So that's it for this class. As I always say, you're welcome to message me on either Slack or email if you have any questions or need help. Just remember that assignment 1, part 1 is due Sunday, and then part 2 is due the week after. So, yeah. And the YouTube video for this class should be up either tomorrow or the day after. I try to, again, like I say, I try to get it done, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time. So.